Okay, so let's review. I'm going to turn some lights off for this because I still don't know how to do this. Nobody does.
You just have to not double tap.
Don't double tap.
Press box to walk away, let it do its thing.
If you double tap, once it turns off, you walk away and then it turns back on again because it receives the signal, oh, you're back on. So it's saying that everything needs to be updated, but it looks like everything is updated. So.
Okay, don't sweat about it too much right now. Okay, so sort of the last piece of this, and we're not going to get too deep into this, I don't think, because A, we're running out of time, but B, I wanted to touch on some way that we could consume this service that we spent all semester building, right? So we built out we went from an ERD that we designed, right? Then we started building it out using our admin site. Then we exposed an API. So we've got all this data now that's just sitting up there waiting to be consumed. So again, we could choose to consume it in many different ways. We could have a desktop application that just needs to tap into our API. We could have an iOS app. We could have an Android app. We could have a website that grabs from there. We could write an Angular application front-end web that pulls down the data, similar to what we did last semester, right? So we have all these options. So the question is, how can we consume this data? And I thought, well, what would be a nice, fun way to do that, right? Because this is all fun when all is said and done, right? So much fun. And there is one, considering we're all Webbies in here, I thought would be a nice thing to do is look at the Ionic framework, because the Ionic framework sits on top of a framework called Cordova. And Cordova, you can equate to iOS, or you can equate it to sort of the underlying layer of Android. Cordova is a layer that essentially you can build applications with, that you can throw onto your phone. And that Cordova layer has access to everything on your phone, right? So all of the things that your phone can do, like all of the hardware, it has access into it. So think of Cordova as another framework in which to write applications that you can put onto iOS, Android. I think that's the only two that they're claiming right now. I don't think Windows Phone or BlackBerry is going to be done anytime soon. But anyways, for the two biggies that are out there. But the nice thing about Cordova is that the development, the coding that you do, is all done in web technologies. So it's done in HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, right? So the idea here is that you're building web applications that are built on web technologies, right? So that's the interface. So I thought for us who are web specific, seeing as we spend most of our time in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? A little bit of back-end scripting, that this would be a comfortable thing to do. Now, on top of Cordova can also sit Ionic. Ionic is a library that sits on top of Cordova. And what Ionic gives you is the ability, it organizes all of this HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in a certain way. And what they use is Angular, right? So Ionic uses AngularJS as sort of the basic structure in the way that you would write any application using Angular. And seeing as we dipped our feet in Angular last semester, we'll come back to it and visit it. So what we're doing is we're taking AngularJS and we're going to use Angular, HTML, CSS to write the front end of an application that we can build and load onto our phone, which is kind of cool, right? And the other thing, the nice thing about Cordova and the fact that we write stuff in web technologies is because the thing that that makes it nice and what makes Cordova an attractive solution is that it's cross-platform. So where you guys did Android last semester, now this application could be loaded on Android or iOS. So it's got that cross-platform niceness to it, right? And that's what HTML, JavaScript, and CSS afford us when we're doing that. Okay? So you can think of this application as being wrapped in the Cordova platform, and that Cordova platform gets loaded onto the phone. And Cordova has access to all the different functionality of the phone. So for example, if you wanted to write an app that wants to use the camera, no problem. There are hooks from Cordova into your phone's camera functionality, regardless of the type of phone. Okay? So again, we're scratching the surface, right? We're just doing tiny little bit. This is as much about consuming our service that we built as it is doing anything in Ionic. But hopefully, this feels somewhat comfortable. So what I thought we'd do is, let's just review what you did in the lab and think of it as sort of a little review of Angular and the things that are Ionic specific. So these Ionic tags that are built in, okay? So when we run this application, let me bring up the command line. So in the lab, the person that wrote the lab tutorial provides a little local server running Node that's going to spit out some data, and that's sort of our dummy data for this little application. So if I go to the desktop, I think I put mine on my desktop, and I say CD Ionic, and I say CD Ionic in here. So we've got so what you would have built out was this server, and then we created an Ionic application in the conference folder. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say node server, and that's going to start up our little data server, right? And that's going to run on port 5000. And what does that give us? Well, it gives us some data that we can work with. So you can think of this as the JSON data that we'd be pulling down into our application. So if I say localhost 5000/sessions, we get this, just a little smidgen of data, but enough to work with for our application. And so we have a sessions get, and then we have a specific get by ID. Okay, so we can get a specific session, or we can get the entire list of sessions. And then the Angular application that you would have built under conference will include all of the code to speak to that service. Okay, so when you swapped out the playlists for the sessions, you would have been talking to that little session API that we've got going. So let me start up my Angular, my Ionic as well. So CD Ionic, and I want now to start up my Ionic app. I've got to go into the folder that I created, CD conference, and in here is all of the code that gets generated by Ionic framework, right? So when we said Ionic, was it Ionic create? No, Ionic. What was the term? I forget the term. To create a new project. Someone tell me quick. Ionic. Sir, no, that runs it. Ionic start, right? So when we say Ionic start, we're telling the Ionic framework that we've installed, the command line interface, that we want to start a new project. We give the project a name. We gave it the name conference. And we also wanted to say what the template we were going to use as our starting point, all right? So we use the side menu, right, in that project. But that's not the only, there's another one as well that we could use as well. So what I thought we'd do is let's take a look at the other. We won't look at blank because blank is kind of blank, and so there's nothing really to look at. Go figure. But let's look at the tabs one and see what that produces for us. So let's go, I'm going to go just up one level. So in my Ionic tutorial master, I'm going to create another folder project for Ionic. I'm going to say Ionic start, and I'll call it tabs example. And I think the template we want to use is called tabs, I think. I can't remember. Let's try it. Ionic templates, side menu. Let's see. Tabs, yeah. So notice when you create it in your lab, we use the side menu, which is actually not the default. So it looks like we don't even need to put tabs in, because if we just leave it out, it'll create a tabs one for us. Okay, so why don't we do that? So I'm just going to say tabs example. I could put tabs in if I want, but it's the default. So let's just create a Ionic tabs example, and then we'll go in and take a look at that one. This is where I play Jeopardy music while we're waiting for it to start. Okay, there we go. And notice it's pulling it down. So those templates that we use get pulled down live from GitHub. That's a good thing to remember. So it pulls down what looks like a base, and then it pulls down the starter tabs files in particular. And notice that in order for that project to work, it has some NPM dependencies. So when we go look at that folder, just like in your conferences folder, you'll notice there's a node modules folder, right? Which means that it relies on a bunch of packages off of NPM. Okay.
You're recording this, right?
Beg your pardon?
You're recording this?
I am.
Okay.
Yep.
So I've somehow managed to gotten rid of my entire lab 3.
Oh no! It's a good thing you had it pushed up.
No, I couldn't push it up.
Oh,
I managed to even undo it on GitHub too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that takes talent.
Clicked the wrong button.
Oh no.
I was like, oh, what
Well,
is
did you
this?
check? You mean you deleted it?
Apparently.
Did you check your?
Like it.
Did you check your recycle bin? Because I
No,
can't see
think
it just vanishing.
It completely removed itself from GitHub too.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like it went back to not having conference at all, and now I don't have any conference at all anywhere.
While this is happening, just notice here that we've got a lot of documentation that you can look at if you're interested in reading up on this. Now, here's the thing about, I had to make a decision about this. Ionic framework has actually just come out with version 2 of their framework. We are using version 1. The reason we're using version 1 is because version 1 is based on AngularJS, which is what we used last semester. Google has since released Angular 2. I don't know how much you know about Angular, but Angular is wildly popular out there now, the version that we've used. But Google went and totally rewrote Angular from scratch. So there are now 2 different versions of Angular out there that are going to be sort of there when you guys go out in the wild. So when you guys go talk about, if you guys get an interview or something and say, oh, you guys you did a little bit of Angular, did you use Angular or Angular 2? You'll have to say AngularJS, okay? And you can't say Angular 2 because there's so much that's changed between Angular 2 and AngularJS, Angular 1, that they're very different, okay? So I wasn't going to force you guys to learn Angular 2 while we were doing this Ionic. So Ionic version 1 plays nice with Angular 1. Ionic version 2, which literally just came out in the last couple of weeks, works with Angular 2. So keep that in mind. So when you go look at the Ionic documentation, make sure that you're not looking at Ionic version 2 if you happen to need to go there. All right? So these are the templates that we have. Those templates live in a repo. There's also these demos that you may want to look at, which are kind of cool, and it's in CodePen. So you can actually go in, and this CodePen basically is just a bunch of little demos of things that you can pull down and take a look at. All right, so there's lots up there to take a look at with regards to sample code. But I think for our purposes, the lab code should, for the most part, work for us. Like that code that you can reference in the lab should work for most of what we want to do. Okay. Let's see how we're doing with the install. Let's see if it worked. Yep. Okay. So my tabs worked. So let's go into. So now I have one called tabs example. So I'm going to cd in there, and I'm going to do Ionic serve, and I'm going to do -- lab. They don't do that in the lab in the little tutorial, but that -- lab brings up a nice view of both Android and iOS. So I would suggest you do that all the time. Oh, that ain't going to work. try it again. Ionic server dash lab. Oh, you are correct. I had a good run. I don't know what's going on with me today. Ionic serve. And what that does is that starts up a server. Ionic starts up a little server running on whatever the default port is. I think it's 8100, right? So here we go. So we've got our tabs. So notice what's different here with regards to the tabs template. The tabs template gives us some tabs here at the bottom, right? So notice for iOS, it's a little different from what you'll see for the Android version. In the Android version, the tabs show up on top, right? So here's the Android version, right? And now the thing about these, as you probably saw in the lab, the data that comes up in these templates is just static data, right? That they just statically bake into the code, right? And you ripped it out and then you pointed it to localhost 5000, right, to get your data. So that's great because you had to create a resource, a little factory resource, be able to and do some gets on that JSON. So you'll be able to use that. So what I'd like to do is maybe we need to decide what exactly we want to show in our example. So that's what I wanted to do today, was sort of say, okay, what kind of views do we want to have in our application? I'll say right now, the application doesn't have to cover all the data that we did in the API, okay? I'm not going to torture you by having the phone look at every single piece of data. But there is certain things, there are a certain number of levels I want us to go into to be able to navigate, all right? So, so let's have a look at our, let me see if I can bring up File Explorer, my desktop, my tutorial. Oh, actually, yeah, I'll just open it up here in. So when you guys, so this is one reason why I asked you guys to use Visual Studio Code, is because most of what you're going to be doing in using like a framework like Ionic is mostly just CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, right? So like you can write Ionic Cordova apps in Visual Studio if you want, but it's kind of overkill, right? You can do it in Visual Studio, but it's like shooting a sparrow with a bazooka. You don't really need just a nice little text editor like a Visual Studio Code or Brackets or Sublime, right? They all seem to handle that really nice. So some of you are using, or was it WebStorm? Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted you guys to see Visual Studio Code. It's a really, really nice text editor, and I think it's a good option. Okay. Now, if you look at the what was generated in when you said Ionic start, right? It created a bunch of folders. Notice it had some node modules. It's got something called hooks, in which it's got some JavaScript in there. So here's the nice thing about writing for Ionic in this case. The only area that you really need to worry about writing code in is the www folder, right? The actual coding, the actual front end, all lives in that www folder. All the other folders in here are really just supporting folders for the app to work, okay? So what's in this www folder? Well, it has one HTML file called index. So let's look at that real quick. So index is really our only web page, if you want to think of it that way, right? And instead of going from page to page, like you might do in a regular website, because we're using Angular, we're staying on one page, but we're switching from view to view now. And there's a little bit of routing, as you would have seen. So Angular has a routing mechanism very similar to routing that you might see on a server side, like Express that we looked at, or ASP.NET, right? So we can set up routing to basically say what view do we want to show at any given moment on our front end. So notice what's in here in that index.html. Oh, come on. So in index.html, really mostly what we're bringing in here is just importing a whole pile of libraries. We're importing some JSON code, we're importing a little bit of CSS, and obviously this CSS is really just going to be for styling our pages, right? And that's what's going to style our views for both iOS and for Android. It's bringing in some code specific to Ionic, JS code, and this is stuff we wouldn't touch, right? It's also bringing in the Angular resource. Remember Angular resource? That was a library we had to bring in order to be able to use the resource module in Angular so that we could do stuff like our gets and pushes, you know, like actually make get calls, HTTP calls, our delete, post, patch, put, remember? There's a JavaScript library that has to do with Cordova. So again, these are libraries that we don't really need to touch. They just are required in order to work. So Cordova.js will be, now this will actually only work once we go into a build, right? This is when it's actually, Cordova will kick in when we're actually on a phone, in other words, right? When we're actually on a device, that's when Cordova.js will kick in. We don't actually need to worry about that. What's next? Well, here's where we get into our code, right? So this is it. When it comes to our code here, is there a way for me to zoom in here? Oh, zoom in, Control+. There we go. So the only code on index.html that we really need to worry about is app.js. That should look familiar, right? Because that's essentially where all of our Angular code goes in our app.js. We've got services as well, so it looks like we've broken out our Angular code into multiple files in this case. But we have our basic app.js, we have a services.js, and it looks like we put all of our controllers in a separate file. But in theory, you could put all of this code into app.js if you wanted to, right? Just like we did when we worked with Angular last semester, right? All of our Angular code could go in one file, but it kind of makes sense to break it up into separate files. Notice that the order in which you put these matters as well, right? So you wouldn't want to put services above app.js because app.js or services is going to reference app.js. Okay, so keep that in mind. And here's the body, and look at that. All the body is doing is starting our ng app starter, right? So if you remember, our ng app now, in this case, this is the directive saying that Angular app begins, so our entire Angular app lives between this body tag, these body tags, right? Makes sense? Now, here's where it gets a little bit Ionic specific, is we get these new tags called a nav view, all right? So here's where you may have to dig a little bit into the documentation to see exactly what nav view does. But obviously, nav view is going to go grab some of these templates. Right? So the different views that we're going to be using in Ionic are going to be these HTML files right here. So Angular is going to be responsible for swapping these different views out depending on where we navigate in our application. Does that make sense to everyone? So in, for example, in sessions, we have a view that we're going to show in the Ionic framework called sessions. And notice that it is doing a little ng repeat. That should look familiar to you. Here's where it gets a little bit different, but you have this lab as a template now, so you can use this as sort of a model to build out what we need. So it looks like in this case, if I want to see a list of all the sessions, I'd create a view that has content and then a list. And then from that list, I would fill up using ng repeat, which we're familiar with, all of the, in this case, session in sessions, right? Now look at this href. What do you think is going to kick in for each of these hrefs? What does this $@ sessions session ID refer to? So what portion of our Angular app is going to kick in when we actually click on one of the items? What does this look like? So let's go to our API. If I say if I say academic years /5, what happens behind the scenes in our ASP.NET app?
That 5 is a variable.
Sorry?
I said that 5 is a variable.
That 5 is a variable, but what happens between when I get to the method and so I make the request and I get to the method that handles that variable? What happens? How do I get to the right method when I say academic year /12? A route, right? So routing kicks in, says, okay, this route matches academic year /ID, so I'm going to send it to some method in my controller, right? Exactly the same thing. Think about it. Remember I said that Angular, I don't think we did routing in our Angular, did we? All the Angular we did last year was one view. Is that fair to say? Remember? So we didn't actually switch from page to page in Angular. So that's going to be the only sort of new thing that you're going to do, is that now we've got multiple views that we could show at any given time in Angular. Okay? But the way we switch between them is very much like the routing we do for everything else. Okay? So where does that routing live? Does anyone remember when they did the lab? At the bottom of what, sorry? App.js. So let's go take a look at app.js. So all the routing happens with this state machine. All right? So notice here that this config, when this runs for the first time, and it sets up all of the different routes that our app can have. Okay? And notice that we get a state provider and a URL router provider. All right? So those are two built-in Angular objects. Okay? And again, at this point, you don't have to know what these do intimately. You just need to be able to sort of figure out what's going on here. So to our state, we're adding in a whole bunch of different routes. So for example, when we do /app, what we're doing is we're actually routing it to be able to load in menu.html. What was the one we had? I just had open. Was it sessions? Yeah. So here's the example of these app.sessions. So when the URL, oh no, it's actually this one, isn't it? We had a specific one. So we say if the URL that we hit, so the $/session/some ID, then go load in the session.html template. So it's very much the same as routing to, we're saying go load in for our view, go load in this HTML template and route to the session controller. That makes sense? And then the resource takes over, remember, resource in our controllers. So let's go to the session controller and see what happens. So if we go into controllers.js and we look at session controller, down at the bottom here. So what is this telling you here? We've got two different ones here, right? So it's telling us to use the session controller, right? When we clicked on session/ID, it's telling us load this template, this HTML. So this is the HTML that we're going to do, and we're going to use this controller to go get our code. And here's what it does. It says we're going to load in our scope. Remember good old scope? That's our object that sort of links us between our front end and our controller. There it looks like there's an object called session. We then say session.get, where we pass in the ID that came from our URL. Does it feel familiar? Right. In fact, let's see if we can. I haven't actually tried this, but let's try it. So let's bring up our let's say Ionic serve. Oh no, I don't want to do the tabs example. I want to do the conference. So I'm going to say cd conference, and I'm going to say ionic serve dash dash lab. There we go. And it pulled, remember, from that API. So remember, your API is live up on Azure, right? So you're just going to pull from your Azure API. Oh, I wish I could open this in Chrome instead. Let's try this. Okay, there we go. So let's do this. Let's say, you know what? I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it not with lab. Just give me one sec, because I'm going to step through and I don't want to have two different views. Let's try it again. So if we say ionic, quit, ionic serve, and let's just do one view. Okay. So let's copy that, put it into Chrome instead. Chrome is more comfortable doing that. So here's our application just in a browser, which is kind of, oh, come on. There we go. All right. So let's pretend this is sort of mimicking our phone, right? And we can go back. Here's our side menu. Say sessions, browse, search, and login. So let's say more tools, developer tools. And remember, let's go into the code and let's put a breakpoint at our app.js. So let's just take a look here and see what's going on. See if we can follow a little bit of what might be going on here. So when we first start up, we've got a starter. It brings in the Ionic and it brings in all the controllers. Okay, because remember those controllers are in a different file, so we need to bring them in as a module. This code here just starts up the Ionic platform and gets everything set up with Cordova and all that. So we never need to touch that code there. Then we configure our state providers. So let's see if we can do this again. So if I put a breakpoint, yeah, let's put a breakpoint here, and if I refresh, notice that we hit state provider. And if we're going to step through, we load in all of our different states, and then we also have a fallback. So for example, if there's no route that we put in that matches any of the routes that we have up here, then it'll just load in app.sessions as a default. So that's what happened, right? Remember when I first load that app in, it just goes right to the sessions. Okay. So let's continue on there. Let's see. Let's put a breakpoint on controller. So let's put a breakpoint on where the controller gets called to load all the sessions and where the controller gets called to load one session. Okay? So here we go. I'm going to refresh this again, and I should hit the controllers. Whoops, I still have this guy on. I should hit the controllers call, and there it is. Okay? So is this kind of coming back to you guys with regards to, we make a call, it's going to hit a specific controller. In this case, because we hit /sessions, the router said, okay, I need to load in a certain view, and we need to go and run the code in the sessions controller, right? Now, what does sessions controller do? It simply has an internal variable called sessions, which is going to hold all of our data off of this .query. So do we remember what session.query is? What does that tie into with regards to our query? Session.query is part of what part of Angular? We also have session.get. We could also have session.post, session.
So it's a part of the HTTP, but
Kind of, but what was the module that's in play now when we have access to all of those verbs? It's the ng resource,
yeah, okay.
right? Ng resource, does that ring a bell? Remember, resource was a nice way to package all of our calls to our, we could do HTTP, but with ng resource, it packages it all into a nice CRUD-based package, right? So let's run our query. And let's have a look at sessions now. So notice sessions has, oh, it's a promise, so it's going to be, well, let's see. Let's fast forward. And so let's take a look at where that actual resource gets set up. So this, remember, this is in our controllers. If we go back to app.js, remember we should see ng resource somewhere. Probably services. Aha. Look familiar? You guys did this last semester. Remember? So you created a module based on ng resource, and then you used the .factory, which basically created a factory object called session, and that session returns back a resource based on this particular call to the session, to the API, the JSON service. Okay. So if we're going to hit different pieces of data in our API, we have to make a factory for academic years, factory for courses, factory for whatever objects we decide we want to have in our little application, right? So this is using ng resource, .factory. Then we use the resource object to make our calls to our service. Okay. So we're going to there'll probably be multiple factories depending on what objects we want to hit, right? What entities we want to bring back and put into our application. Okay. So this is very, very simple, but it's going to give us, I think, enough to go on in order to get the data that we want back. We can get a list of some stuff back. So some of our API calls just return lists, right? List of academic years, a list of courses, a list of prerequisites, a list of semesters, right? So, and we have the ability to cherry pick. So a specific semester, a specific academic, specific course, okay? So let's decide what we want our application or what we want our little app to actually return for us. So let's go to our API. And let's decide. And I think what I'm going to do wait a second. Balsamiq is supposed to be on this machine. Have you guys used Balsamiq at all? There it is. So on the workstation, there's Balsamiq mockups. We'll see. We'll try to see if maybe we want to use this or not. That's too bad. I don't know if maybe Allison didn't know that we had this software on there. Is this the kind of stuff you worked on with Allison with your web stuff? Would have been nice to have. I think when I when I made sure this was installed, I think Stephen Sharkey was still,
Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
using it in church.
yeah. So again, it's just meant to give some visuals, mock-ups of what our application might look like. So you'll notice that we've got iOS, if you want to. So you could drag down a phone and sort of mock up what you think we might want this to look like. So let's see what that looks like. Let's say this might be beyond the scope of what we want to do right now. Actually, so what do you want to be able, we may come back to this, but what do you want to be able to see in the application? What data do you think is going to be most important? So say you're a student who wants to use the phone app that you guys have built for them. They're a student here at NSCC, and they want to look up some information about the courses. What kind of stuff might you want to know?
Just the academic year.
Just the academic year. All right,
And all the courses.
that's not going to happen.
Probably programs and concentration.
Like concentrations and the courses that are in there.
Cool. All right. So
And
So-
what semester they can.
what semester? Okay.
I probably want like, if I was looking at courses, I mean, I don't know what the descriptions. Courses.
Okay. Fair enough. So let's try this.
Everything except that.
Everything except academic years. I think we should do. So let's see. So what should be the very first thing that we see in our application when we open it up, do you think?
Concentrations.
Concentrations, okay? Again, feel free to is it something that maybe we could have like you notice at the bottom there were those 3 tabs where you had sort of starting points at the bottom. So what could maybe be those? The years? I don't know.
Based on the years you have concentration.
What could be the 3 main categories that our application lets us dig into?
Program.
Yeah. So Alistair, you say years, academic years, programs. Is that what you said, Andrew?
Yeah.
And
Courses.
Content.
concentrations.
Courses are important too, but,
Courses are important too.
yeah, but I feel like
Base.
it's less important unless you know what concentration. I feel like concentration is one of the most important ones, because then you're like, okay, so these are kind of where I'm interested at. What's this like? Same could be said about programs.
Is there enough to maybe we could, like, I guess the point is, what are going to be our starting points for drilling down and looking at? I think ultimately what I want, our end point is always going to be, show me a course, and like our deepest point is going to be, show me the details about a course. It's like a course number, a course name, and then maybe list the prerequisites and the courses that it's a prerequisite for. That would be sort of the deepest drill down I'd like to see, right? So you drill down into something, you can either drill down through a concentration and get a list of courses, but at some point you click on a course and it shows that course description, those course details. So are these the 3 different starting points that you want to drill down to a specific course? Perhaps. So if we say academic years, and then we get a list of academic years, and then that, what does that do? That gives us a list of academic years, probably with the most recent on top. Then when we click on an academic year, what do you want that to be able to show? Sure, semesters? What do you think? So academic years then shows the semesters for that academic year. That makes sense to me. Then when we click on a semester, course offerings.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, we can go different routes to get to a course. We can go through course offerings if you want. So maybe we say course offerings. And then that course offering gets us to a course. And in that course, it would show the code, the title, and maybe just the list of prerequisites. Remember, we have a call to our API that gives us that information, right, about the course. So we create a course, we get the little bits of data about the course itself, and then just show the prerequisites and the is prerequisite for. More shapes. I want, oh, go away. I just want arrows. Give me an arrow. Yeah, sort of like that. Flowchart.
Third one down says arrow shapes.
That's too easy. All right, so let's just say a simple arrow. So we want, how do I rotate this? Of course not. Nothing's ever easy in Visio. How do I make this point down? Ah, okay, there we go. So we want academic years to do semesters, and then semesters to course offerings, and then course offerings to a course. Okay, so that could be one path to a course, looking at a course. So what about programs? What could be the path for programs? Again, I'm not trying to steer you in a direction. All I'm mandating is that at whatever our paths end up being, that we.
Program seems like it would be like concentrations, then course offerings, and course.
Okay, so if we go by programs, then the next. What happened to my basic flowchart shape? There we go. And let me just drag some of these out so I'm not switching back and forth. So you're saying from programs we could go to concentrations? And from concentrations to?
Course offerings.
Does it have to be course offering though? Maybe we just do courses. Remember, because course offerings make sense because it's tied to a specific semester. Maybe we just want to look at, okay, what concentration are in the programs and then what courses are in the concentrations. Maybe it's not a specific offering this year. Maybe we just want to see, I don't know. And then from concentrations, I guess, seeing as we have concentrations here, do we maybe, I don't know, do we want to start for concentrations with this one? What do you think?
Probably not, then. We should have course prereqs somewhere.
Well, course prereqs will be listed here. Courses, well, let's do this. Courses, and then this will give specific course. And we'll say that and what will be mandated is that course will show course data, course with prereq info. And with this one. Any another big picture starting point you can think of?
Just visualizing our ERD, and we've kind of went straight to courses from both sides.
Right. So maybe it's we don't have, maybe we don't have to go to courses at the end. Is there anything else? So maybe, here's the thing to remember about programs too, right? Is we want to get the concentrations for, well, that'll, again, we're just kind of mocking it up now, so we'll see what we can do. So let's see, is there a third starting point? How about, probably have the ERD up. That would be helpful. Well,
In the course.
we kind of do, in that when we get down to the course description, we can include the prereqs there. But I don't know, is there somewhere else that would make sense? Like, say, like if you were to open your phone and say, gee, I'm about to fail course X, what is that going to be a prereq? What courses won't I be able to do next year? Or if I want to do C++ programming next year, what prereqs do I need? Sort of thing. Any idea? Again, I don't know the answer. I'm not trying to lead you in any particular way. Here's the ERD. Academic year to semester to course offering to a course. And we went program to concentration to I don't know. Say, do we just want to see a list of courses? Maybe?
Yeah.
Courses, and then what will that do? That will bring us, so we'll get a list of courses, and then, and that's just a list of all courses, regardless of whether they're being offered or not. It's just all the courses that are available in the program that you can look at. And so maybe just all courses, and then this guy. That it? Maybe.
Is there an easy way to do like above courses to have like all courses, things that have prerequisites and things that are prerequisites for, like you were saying, like if you're going to fail something, you just be like, okay, prerequisites for it, and click that course. Could I jump to that, or that'd be too much?
How about this? And then that brings back a course. So you go directly to a course code. And you guys have in the lab an example of at least the beginning of a search page, right? So you wouldn't be starting from scratch. So maybe, yeah, so programs, academic years, and search. So when you go to search, it gives you a text box and it says, just put in a course code. Does our API handle get me a course by course code? Doesn't, does it?
No, we're doing
So you guys can add another method to your courses controller that takes in the course code. That's easy. That's a 1 minute, publish it to Azure, and you're done. Then you have another method call to your API. What do you think? Think that's so maybe we should go with the, I don't know. If we go with the, we have to choose whether or not we want to use the sidebar, the side menu that we did in the lab, or if we want to use the tabs that I just created one for, right? Let's take a look. So if I say quit, and then I say cd dot dot, and I go back to CD tabs example, and I say ionic serve. So maybe this is what so maybe it starts with programs. So again, down here, right? Those 3 starting points as far as a tabs is concerned. Programs. What was the other one?
Academic years.
Academic years and search. Right? So you'd have to use this template, but borrow from the lab that you did. The different views. And again, that's just one layout, you know. I like that idea. What do you guys think? Do you think that's not going to be too daunting, right? Because you'll be reusing some of your views, particularly when you're looking at course details, right? So it's going to be more about the routing, right? Just like, okay, programs, and then when I click on a program, it's going to link to maybe a, what was it? So I'm going to need a programs controller. I'm going to need a programs controller that's then going to have a concentrations controller. And then that concentrations controller is going to give me a link to the courses controller, just a list of courses. And then within that courses controller, it looks like I may have to do get me a list of courses and get me a specific course, right? And then academic years controller, semesters controller, course offerings controller, which then goes and grabs a specific call from the course controller. So just like in the sessions one that we did, the only calls we're making are gets, get me a list or get me a specific in that lab example we did. So notice we don't have to do we're not creating anything through this app. We're not going to change or update anything. We're not deleting anything in this app. We're just doing a couple of gets, just like we did in the lab. That sound good? I like that. That gives you guys a kick at the can. And notice that these icons here are all built in Ionic. So you can go off and say, okay, well, what kind of built-in icons does Ionic provide with this code? So if I go look at the menu, so let me go back. So I'm going to say File, Open, Folder, and instead of Conference, I'm going to open up Tabs. And let's go in here and let's look at our templates. So there should be a tabs, status, chats, and account. There you are. So those are 3 tabs that show up here: status, chats, and account. Notice here that there are some built-in icons that you can use right in the Ionic framework if you want to go look at that. So here's the icon off and icon on. So there's a gear one, there's a chat boxes one, there's a pulse. Let's see what else there is. So you have to be kind of resourceful here. I'm not sort of handing this to you, as you know. Ionic icon list. So you got all of these to play with. So let me guess, is there a magnifying glass for search? Probably. Hey, Ion iOS search, right? Hey, if you wanted to download something, right? So again, this is what the Ionic framework gives you. It gives you all of these sort of built-in bits.
Do we need course offerings after semesters? What's their like unique in-course offering that would display? Wouldn't we just jump from like semesters to courses?
So course offerings after semesters?
Yeah, wouldn't that just kind of go to courses, I guess, at that point? Similar to concentration courses?
No, because I think as far as let's see.
Because like you can, if you're looking
Well-
at academic years, you can display your title. If you're looking at semesters, you can display the name. Course
But the only
offering
way
is
that
just-
the only way that you can get course information specific to a semester is through course offerings, right?
Isn't that the same as concentration though?
Well, maybe, yeah. So I'm looking at this one right here, right? So I think that's good. Academic year to a specific semester, and then that specific semester we assign certain course offerings for that semester, right? So we should list those course offerings.
But isn't that the same workflow if we're going through programs, concentrations to courses? Wouldn't
So,
you need course offerings?
Programs to concentrations.
Would that need course offerings, then courses at that point then?
Well, remember, course offerings are tied to a semester too, and semester's not in here. So yeah, I guess that's the question is,
It's
can
just
we get a
listed
list of
for
courses based on a concentration? But it depends on what, it all kind of circles around that course offering, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It all really, this is sort of the glue that connects everything together, right? That course offering. Would everyone agree? So maybe course offering has to be in there everywhere. So for both of those. So why don't we say this? Concentrations. I don't know, course offerings. Like that?
Because basically, once you get the course offering, it's already going to be narrowed down by your previous selections you've made.
Okay. So I guess if it's course offerings, we don't need a list of courses after, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we should take that out.
You're just looking for those offerings of that concentration.
But actually,
It's essentially a list of courses anyway.
let's do search course title. That search course title could potentially, so you're looking for terms within a title, that could return possibly a list of courses, one or more courses, and then that course drills down to the info, right? So for example, if I type in the word web, right? That could then return a list that has web to dev 1, intro to web dev, I love web, web for dummies, spider's web, right? And then when you click on one of those courses, it brings you down to the specific, right? How to weave a spider, how to weave webs. I like that. But that's our ultimate goal, is to get to this particular view, looking at specific. And that's a good one there. So if I put in, oh gee, if I do web app development 2, which we're doing right now, what are the prerequisites for that course? So you type it in here, you find the course, and then look at its details right away. Say, oh, hey, what are all the courses in a particular program? And maybe what we do in this case is we default to the most current year. So maybe when we say programs, it's like maybe you say something like current programs. And then you say, get me all the programs that fall within the current academic year. Something like that. And in this case, we just say, oh, well, here's a history. What were the course offerings 3 years ago? Right? I like that. So why don't I save this? I'll post it up to D2L. You guys can at least start getting the gears going. I would say, are we all agreed that you're going to create your project based on the tabs?
Yeah.
So create it based on the tabs, but you'll have to reference your side menu lab one to get some ideas for the different views in that. Okay?
I have a question about using this virtual machine for it.
Sure. Oh, what's your
Like
question?
I was using WebStorm on a different virtual
on the
machine,
Linux one?
and this one's having, like I just installed Node, that was having trouble installing Cordova when I'm on it.
Do you still not have the Windows one that I gave you?
And I'm using the Windows one.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
But it's not installing for you?
A lot of it, it's not really anything.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
it could take forever.
That too.
How long does it take to install Cordova Ionic for some people?
Tutorial people.
Like,
Somehow.
it's not.
I'm not exactly
Yeah,
sure
it's-
how.
It's actually just,
It's there.
But sometimes when I push it, try to push it, it has all the files, and sometimes it's just, oh, the getting rid got changed.
Yeah, no, it's just.
So I think for some reason it's pushing to.
okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording. Does that sound good?
Prolong the video, hopefully.
Are you up and running, Andrew, with your lab? No, still working? All right.
I can't figure it out.
We just-
I'll be texting this, this is gonna work somehow.
Yeah.
Sessions.
Yeah, but how do you see like all the different types?
I'll figure out what.
The different types of
Yeah.
templates.
Yeah.
He Googled it, I think,
Okay.
by,
I can Google it.
so I tried to type in.
Well, I'll save this little Visio doc, and I will I'll post it up there.
It just came up to like 3 to 1 out of town.
Yeah, try using